All right, welcome to Weather Eye. I'm meteorologist Ian Kowalski, and let's just talk about the point of the show. This is our inaugural episode. Basically, what it is just another way for us to talk about the weather. Sometimes that means you have a big event earlier on in the week, and we'll post that under here. We'll kind of go back over what was happening. Big snowstorm, big thunderstorm. It's going to go under here. And the other thing, which is what we're going to do today, is a look forward at the future. We're going to be going over kind of a little December climatology, what our averages are, why we're expected to see either a certain warm or dry December. And then we're just talking a little bit out in the new year. And another thing, I would like to do, a 2-week forecast, but it tends to be a little bit inaccurate. But when you look at these numbers, the way we're going to look at them today, it gives us a better idea of those averages and kind of a generalized direction to kind of help you plan your month out. So let's take a look at that right now. The first thing is that we're going to see is we're going to keep it simple. This is our temperature outlook for December 2025. And just to explain this graphic a little bit, because we're going to see a couple similar ones later on. The darker red and orange areas, it's more likely to see those above average temperatures. And the lighter blues, well, the more blue there is, the more likely you see below average temperatures. And that little gray area in the middle, I know it throws you for a bit of a loop, exactly a 50-50 chance. But don't mistake it. It's not actually a measure of scale. Sometimes you'll see this graphic on broadcast and, someone will be going really fast and it's like, oh, it's supposed to be super warm in western Colorado coming up. But really, the darker the orange, it's not going to be warmer. It's just more likely to see above average conditions. It could just be 1 degree above average, but just a higher likelihood of that. And so what does our actual graphic tell us? Well, western Colorado's looking at a warm start to December. Probably less likely than, say, down towards our south near New Mexico and Arizona and parts of West Texas. But those areas are more likely to see above average conditions, just slightly more likely to see an above average December here. And that would be no surprise given how crazy warm November was, at least as of recording this. It was the second warmest on record. We'll see. We have less than a week left in November when I'm recording this, so we'll see if that holds true. But regardless, we're already in an incredibly warm pattern. And it's going to start to cool down as we get in these first couple of weeks of December, but it's really about how long those temperatures hold on into the month, the ones that we see at the start. That's a really big determining factor. And so the other thing we, of course, think about when we think weather is your precipitation. So we've got a pretty similar graphic, wetter in those darker greens and drier in those darker oranges. And we're right in that 50-50 zone, but if you look up north, probably near Rio Blanco, Moffat County, actually more likely to see some moisture just because they're a bit further up in the Rockies, right? We see the Rockies being, of course, the greatest determinant of how much rain and how much snow and how much warmth and how much cold that we see. And usually it's those low pressure systems, it's those Alberta Clippers, right? Those are a big one. They kind of just ride the Rockies all the way down from the south. And so you see a lot more moisture, of course, up towards Montana and Idaho. But we'll get kind of the reasons why you see that here in a little bit. But point is, 50-50 shot. I know sometimes those graphics aren't as helpful as we'd like to, but it really does just show us that the moisture we're expecting is probably going to be closer to average here in December. And so what is that average? Let's take a look at it right now. In terms of temperatures, almost 39 degrees, a little bit under that. Certainly not exactly warm, but, not too crazy for the western slope, all things considered. The Grand Valley tends to run a lot warmer. And so our low average 18 degrees, well below freezing there. Precipitation is just, a little bit under an inch, a little bit over half an inch, 0.6 of an inch exactly. And then our snowfall totals, of course, precipitation and snow, it's not a 1-to-1 ratio. And snow actually comes out to be around 5 inches is what we get in December throughout the month. And, so when you consider those averages, like let's review what we just talked about. Snow, probably going to see about what we're expecting around that 5 inches. Precipitation, a little over half an inch. But then we look at those temperatures, likely above average. So maybe we'll get averages in those low 40s potentially. Although we are, kind of expecting a bigger cool down to start the month that won't necessarily hold true throughout all of it. So let's talk about one of the reasons we're seeing this pattern. It's La Nina. It's the other side of El Nino, something I know you hear a lot about if you were really tuned into the weather. And so what actually is it? Well, it's these shifting oceanic temperatures, right? To actually get a good idea of how it affects us and where it actually is, you really can't look at the United States itself. You have to look all the way off towards the Pacific. And what you're going to see here is there's known high pressure up there, right? It's kind of our big determinant. And as it shifts, it moves a little bit depending on this little blue zone down here. Those are those below average temperatures in terms of the ocean water. And the reason that has such a big effect is because it's going to change where that heat actually is focused. And if you don't have that warm water, you have a lot less lift. Warm water, obviously, it evaporates a little bit more. You turn on the boiler on top of your oven and, heat it up, and the water goes up in the air in terms of water vapor. And it really does work the same way, just at a much bigger scale on the ocean, right? And so we look for this below average temperature zone here around Central America, north central portion of South America, stretching all the way over towards Asia. It's a massive zone again, but it's the number one indicator of if we're going to see El Nino, La Nina, or an INSO-neutral condition. And that low pressure system we saw just a second ago briefly, it shifts, the high pressure system shifts north and south. And right now, it's especially far north because we're in La Nina right now. And what it does, it just pushes that moisture up a little bit, right? We talked about that moisture kind of being focused up towards Idaho, Montana in our December predictions graphic, right? It pushes it a bit further north, and so you start to see a bit wetter conditions up in the Pacific Northwest when you see these La Nina years here. So let's take another look at that. In terms of temperatures, it also has an effect here. Warmer than normal, of course, down towards Texas and really the deep south, generally just speaking, is a bit warmer. And you see, look over there, that little H over in towards the, we'll say northwestern portion of our screen. That shifting of that is what we were talking about just a minute ago. It pushes up that jet stream, changes where the moisture comes into the continental United States, and it changes where that cooler northern air has access. So you do see those below average temperatures over towards the Pacific Northwest and much kind of like Big Sky country over towards Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota. And you get those wetter conditions, right? And we just talked about that too. It allows some of that moisture to push up a little bit further towards the north as well. And so after you get that, you see wetter than normal up towards Oregon, parts of Northern California, up towards Washington, and parts of, over towards British Columbia, up in Canada too, also sees those effects, along with a wetter Midwest. And then a lot drier down towards the south. We're right in the middle of the zones, you'll notice, on a lot of these. So it really, really depends year to year exactly, how extreme of La Nina or El Nino we see, what we're going to see here on the western slope, because we're in the middle zone of the United States and right below where that jet stream typically tends to move. But generally speaking, we are still looking at, like we talked about, drier and a little bit wetter up towards our north. So you can still see how it affects our pattern. And this is INSO-neutral. This is kind of where we're heading in the new year. This is post-December. As you start to head out January, it kind of shifts that moisture over towards the east a little bit and then back up towards the north. So we're going to start to miss out on a little bit more of that as we get into January. That's, again, a little bit further out of a prediction. But what you need to know is, again, December moisture on average, and then we're going to start to, in theory, dry out a little bit. But it's that jet stream, all about that jet stream. I know sometimes, maybe you bring it up a little too much on a broadcast, but it really is just so fundamental, that northern jet stream, how far north and how far south it is. It changes so much about our seasons. And when it comes too far south, well, it's when you get these colder conditions that we're seeing right now, and back up towards the north, that's during the summer. So let's talk a little bit about these kind of astronomical events coming up this month too, right? The Earth's axis, tilted about 23.5 degrees. It's the main thing that gives us these seasons overall. And as we progress throughout the year, we get towards the solstice. I know we all love the solstice because you lose that daylight throughout the day, but also something that's kind of this beautiful meteorological start or astronomical start to a new year. So you can see December 21st or 22nd, that's always when it is. You know it good and well. And this year, it's going to be, as usual, kind of tilting away from the sun, and then we start to lose out on that daylight in the northern hemisphere. And as I'm sure you know, when we have the December solstice, one of the shortest days of the year, only 9 hours and 17 minutes this year is how much sunlight we're going to be getting that day in the northern hemisphere. The southern hemisphere has one of its longest days because it has so much more sunlight due to the tilt of the Earth's axis. So, coming up pretty soon. I know we're all looking forward to kind of a return to more sunlight, but you have to get through the shortest day of the year to get that. And then we're seeing the cold supermoon coming up very soon at the start of December. It's December 4th. And so what's a cold supermoon? Well, the cold moon is just, it's the first full moon of December. That's, not too surprising of a name there. Sometimes all the astronomical and meteorological names, sometimes they aren't all that creative. But let's look at the full moon here. It's 221,965 miles away from the Earth at its apogee. And the apogee basically is just this distance that you see the moon, the closest you get to the Earth, the distance from the Earth to the moon. And, it's not exactly, precise range. 1,000 miles of difference isn't that big in space. But generally speaking, it's just about the closest they can get throughout the year. It's going to be the third of the year, the third supermoon, which is what defines when the Earth is at apogee. So 4:14 p.m. is going to be the peak illumination of that. So, you might actually end up seeing it with it being so bright as we get a little bit closer towards sunset. But generally speaking, you'll be able to take advantage of it later in the day once we actually get to sunset. And then the Geminid meteor shower. This is one of the most important. Geminid. I accidentally added an extra in. That's okay, though. Look, the Geminid meteor shower, it's called that because you look over towards the Gemini twins up in the sky. It's one of the brightest meteor showers you can see all day long. The 13th and the 14th is when you're going to see it kind of start to peak. Right? The 4th through the 17th is when it's technically visible, but it's really those 2 days and overnight. That's going to see the majority of it. 7 p.m. our time is when it is starting, so you should be able to get a view of it if it does end up being a clear sky that evening. So you're going to look a little bit towards east. Again, those Gemini twins, kind of the general direction you look because it kind of appears vaguely that those meteors come out of there. We also talk about fog, getting a little bit more fog already as we kind of close out November, getting the first couple weeks of December. So let's talk a little bit of the science behind that, right? Now, you might know what a temperature inversion is, but it's just one of the many ways that it kind of affects our surface conditions here. So the setup right here, daytime heat leaving the ground, clear night with light winds. Here's the biggest thing. The Earth is holding that temperature much stronger than the actual air is, right? It takes a whole lot longer for that Earth to cool down. And at the same time, right, when that air starts to ascend a little bit, it's taking that moisture from the surface that's going to rise quickly closer towards the drier area. But as you kind of progress throughout the day here, look right here, the moist layer does not absorb much heat. Air near the surface cools quicker, right? It's going to start to warm up a little bit more as you kind of progress throughout the day, and you start to see that fog progress. Because that moisture rises, it gets kind of trapped, right? The warmer air, that's why it's called temperature inversion. Usually when you think you get at those higher elevations, you start to cool down a whole lot more, right? If I'm up on top of the Grand Mesa, it certainly doesn't feel as warm as it does in the Grand Valley. But when that does happen, it creates the conditions for fog because the moisture tries to rise, gets trapped under the warmer layer, and it condenses a lot more. And then that's why you get that not only moisture on your car in the morning, because you have those little temperature inversions kind of every day, really, as you start to get into the winter, start to see the little frost appear on your car, maybe bring the ice scraper out. But it's also what causes that fog, right? Just because you get all that moisture that gets stuck down towards the surface. And so, again, as the moisture rises, water turns into vapor, fog forms. And so that's just a little explanation, a little bit of science about why that kind of happens later in the year. So just kind of close out the show here. I just want to ask if you guys want to send me an email, if you have any questions about this, any of these scientific topics, feel free to ask me. My email's right on the screen here. Additionally, if you have any cool weather events, I'd be happy to feature them here on the show. Any beautiful snowstorms we get as we kind of progress a little bit later on into the month, I'd be certainly happy to throw it up on here. It's going to kind of be a platform for you to ask questions too. If there are any meteorological questions that you might have, definitely send them to me here because I know I can certainly talk all day about temperature inversions and how that affects the atmosphere. And there's so much more I can talk about when it comes to INSO and how El Nino and La Nina kind of affect us. But overall, this is just kind of the introductory episode here. I'm very happy that you all took a little bit of time to watch because I think it's going to be a great platform to help me connect with you guys. And again, communicate with me a little bit. What would you like to see? What would you like me to see me talk about? Especially with all this cool geography out here on the Western Slope. I'm sure we can get really specific into how certain valleys are affected by the geography out here. So thank you all very much for tuning in for our inaugural episode of Weather Eye. And as we head in these next couple months here, we're going to start to wrap this up a little bit more, kind of get some more episodes out there periodically. So thanks for watching.